The cosmic cruiser Avalon is visibly journeying in the cosmos, aimed at a settled celestial body named Homestead 2. Every cabin is vacant. It's running autonomously. Both the 258 personnel and the crowd of 5,000 Voyagers are asleep. Abruptly, the craft navigates an asteroid zone, which is reducing its protective barriers. Energy shifts to fortify the primary shield, yet the vessel is targeting a collision with a huge space rock. Instantly, the space boulder impacts the craft, initiating a variety of operational issues. The vessel starts auto repairs, yet a sleep chamber springs to life. The occupant roused is Jim Preston, an engineering expert. His chamber unlocks and a bot aids his revival, informing him he's been in stasis for 120 years and the craft is a mere 4 months from Homestead 2. He learns he can relish the ship's luxuries during the remaining travel time. Jim gets guidelines regarding his ID strip, room, and main tasks he should engage in before planetary arrival. Eager yet anxious to socialize, he prepares, exits his room, and enters a preset course designed for a full student body. Jim appears mildly uneasy as the projection details Earth's status, describing it as crowded, costly, and hyped. It asks him to defer inquiries until the lessons end, yet he persists in questioning why he's all alone. He discerns the projection cannot reply and sets off to find additional humans. He arrives at the central hall within the craft. The area's empty too, yet a digital service counter proposes assistance. Jim requests to converse with a human and is directed to meet a steward. However, upon discovering an empty room, he inquires to talk with the captain. Upon reaching the bridge, although entry isn't permitted for him, he summarizes the bridge crew is also in a dormant state. Finally, Jim visits the observatory and discovers that the spacecraft is a full 90 years distant from Homestead 2. He's shocked that he arose prematurely and dashes back to the hall and forwards a query to Earth on his next steps, as he lacks re-hibernation know-how. The communication device alerts him that the costly Earth call would require an estimated 55 years to receive a reply. Jim feels crushed. He wanders and locates the vessel's pub, encountering another human. While he chats with the barkeep, something feels peculiar about him. When fetching Jim a drink, he sees the barman is robotic. Jim tries to glean more info from Arthur, but can't convey to the bot why he's there early. Jim awakes in his room the next day and goes to the eatery, swiftly discovering most dishes are for gold-tier passengers. He gets his black coffee and ponders how to repair his hibernation pod. Once he gathers the needed tools, he gets it to work and lies back inside the pod. Yet nothing occurs. Next, he opts to use his tools to enter the crew's sleeping chambers. This also fails. Small glitches are now occurring throughout the vessel. Jim consistently frequents the bar, mainly to engage in conversation with Arthur. Arthur the android counsels Jim, encouraging him to infiltrate the luxury class for better amusement on the spacecraft. Jim explores every dining venue, partakes in games, and tests the onboard entertainment. As time moves on, Jim finds his loneliness only magnifies his sadness. One day, Jim gets intoxicated and roams near the hibernation chambers, discovering an airlock with suits for spacewalks. Inebriated Jim suits up, approaches the airlock, moves a lever, and then hits the button to open the airlock gate. Once he steps out of the vessel, he's spellbound by the cosmic panorama. He's the lone, sentient human feeling that unique experience. Jim disengages the boot magnets and drifts in the void, consumed by sorrow. He re-enters, removes the spacesuit, but returns to the airlock lacking his spacesuit. He grabs the handle, prepped to finish his life, but rethinks at the last second, darts back in, and trips over a bottle. Jim rises and immediately feels an attraction to a female in a nearby pod called Aurora. Scouring the directory for her records, he hears her passenger conversation and falls in love with her. He is later observed beside her pod, still engrossed in her recorded interviews. He returns to the bar, where he is reading her essays and discussing them with Arthur. He grows fixated on the paradox of his circumstances. Leaving Earth for a promising new life, waking prematurely, and discovering his dream woman, only to have her remain inaccessible. Jim continues to ponder about her and begins contemplating the notion of waking her as well. He discusses the dilemma with the android, who fails to grasp the complexity. Should he awaken her for his own sake? He would be marooning her on the vessel to share his fatal destiny. Initially, Jim opts against it, but the thought lingers, and eventually he shifts his viewpoint. He approaches her hibernation pod and successfully triggers its activation. As she emerges from sleep, undergoing the same sequence he experienced, he removes himself and retreats to his quarters. A short time later, he proceeds to the central atrium in search of her. There she stands, equally bewildered as he was 12 months prior. Jim informs her they're the only awake people and guides her to the observatory. Next, he says that he has no access to either the crew or the ship's main controls. Aurora panics and wishes to return to her hibernation chamber. Upon reaching the pod, Jim clarifies there's no specialized machinery aboard that can facilitate their return to hibernation, essentially informing her they're marooned. They return to the main atrium, where he advises her to take some rest as she's just emerged from hibernation. She sympathizes with him for enduring over a year of solitude aboard the spacecraft. Jim returns to the bar, harboring remorse for his actions. He requests Arthur to keep it a secret that he is the one who awakened her. The following morning, Aurora awakens. She returns to the atrium and inquires at the automated information station regarding the sleep pods. Jim meets her there and they head off to have breakfast. Upon their departure, the information desk experiences a glitch. In the dining space, Aurora realizes Jim has eaten the same breakfast for over 365 days and gives him a gold-class menu. They contemplate the chances of fixing the hibernation units, but Aurora isn't willing to throw in the towel just yet. She investigates the infirmary, then sifts through research articles, ultimately reaching the crew's hibernation area to attempt forced entry. Jim takes note of escalating malfunctions occurring throughout the vessel. Subsequently, Aurora expresses her frustrations about her existence on the Avalon. She spends time writing, jogging in the ship's corridors, and swimming in the pool, becoming increasingly cognizant of her state. She heads to the dining hall to converse with Jim, thinking his life story might capture her interest. She asks about his rationale for choosing to move to the distant colony. Initially, Jim quotes company mottos, but then expands, revealing his hope that the new world could offer a new beginning. Subsequently, they relocate to the observatory, where Aurora finally uncovers her reason for being there. Contrary to other travelers on board, she has a two-way ticket. Her plan was to move to Homestead, live there for a year, return to Earth, and become the first journalist to write an unparalleled story. Aurora gradually relinquishes hope in solving their dilemma, while Jim devises a method to lift her spirits. He accompanies her to dance, watch a film, and play basketball. Finally, he introduces her to Arthur at the bar. She briefly unwinds before recalling their unfortunate circumstances. Jim finds himself alone with the android, riddled with guilt for his actions towards her. A bit later, they decide to have a date in the bar. Over dinner, they exchange tales from their personal histories. She recounts to him how her father passed away during her teenage years. Following their meal, Jim escorts Aurora to the airlock where they don their spacesuits. They engage in a joint spacewalk adventure. Finally, Jim has a companion to savor this awe-inspiring journey with. Jim deactivates the magnetic boots they're wearing, allowing them to drift through space as a pair. They re-enter the ship, share an immediate kiss, and then head to his cabin to sleep in each other's arms. Shortly after, they embrace life as if they were a committed couple. Aurora relocates to Jim's cabin and documents her daily life aboard the vessel. Together, they jog, dine, and sleep in unity. Jim continues to explore the vessel and discovers the hydroponic section. He gifts Aurora with a bouquet of flowers. One day, as the ship sails past a red giant, they visit the observatory for a closer look. As it is Aurora's birthday, they have decided to spend the evening dining in one of the ship's many eateries before heading to the bar. While in the restroom, Jim readies the ring he crafted for Aurora as she continues conversing with Arthur in the bar. Arthur inadvertently reveals to Aurora that Jim purposefully awakened her, ignorant of the fact that it was meant to be confidential. Suddenly returning, Jim is met by Aurora's confronting gaze of utter disbelief. She storms off in a fit of rage and panic. Returning to his own cabin, Jim discovers all her belongings are missing. The next day, he encounters her at the cantina, but she bolts the moment he utters a word. Aurora feels completely at a loss. One night, she storms into Jim's cabin, fists flying as if wanting to end his life. Using the communication system because she's been avoiding him, Jim attempts to both apologize and justify his actions. He confesses his love for her, but Aurora dismisses it, unable to forgive him for essentially stealing her life. Another malfunction occurs as Jim is relaxing in his cabin one evening. The ship encounters a severe system error, causing the primary control room to shut down. Subsequently, Jim experiences an elevator glitch. Aurora steps into the main atrium and notices a tree Jim has planted. Then, she visits the cantina, only to find the food dispenser is on the fritz as well. Out of nowhere, the voice of the ship's deck chief interrupts the silence, questioning the tree's origin. Both Aurora and Jim rush into the concourse and find Gus Mancuso examining Jim's planted tree. They make introductions and brief the deck chief on their unusual circumstances. The chief is puzzled about how 3 hibernation pods could possibly malfunction. Mancuso guides them to the ship's bridge and immediately discerns that something is amiss. The system information needs manual confirmation. After leaving the bridge, a rogue robot almost lands on them, and they inform Mancuso that such glitches have become commonplace on the ship. Mancuso states that these system errors shouldn't be happening and shows them how to manually collect relevant data. Jim joins Mancuso as he examines the pods and discloses that he's discovered the reason behind Aurora's pod malfunction. Mancuso finds Jim's manipulation of Aurora's hibernation pod to be inexcusable. Aurora joins him later at the control room while he's analyzing the gathered data. He informs her that there's no remedy for her pod's malfunction. Jim walks in holding the 16th faulty robot they've encountered. Mancuso, feeling the effects of hibernation illness, departs to rest, but coughs up blood on his way out. That night, Aurora can't fall asleep and chooses to go for a swim instead. The ship suddenly experiences a loss of gravity, and she nearly drowns as the swimming pool water becomes weightless. When the gravity drive resets, she barely manages to avoid drowning. After bumping into each other, they both hurriedly look for Mancuso. In the control room, the three of them gradually discover what's been going wrong with the ship. Mancuso concludes that a critical event occurred 2 years ago, disabling a vital system. The team must identify and repair the malfunction. Otherwise, the entire ship will go offline. Should they fail to rectify it, the spacecraft will be left stranded. While seeking the malfunction, Mancuso weakens, prompting Jim and Aurora to escort him to the medical bay. There's no way to extend his life. He's on the brink of death. Later on, all three convene in the observatory, where Mancuso gives Jim his ID bracelet, instructs them to mend the ship, and then passes away. Abruptly, the illumination turns a foreboding red and the ship begins to tremble. Jim informs Aurora that her assistance is crucial, and they sprint towards the engineering section, only to experience another gravity drive failure. And another issue immediately occurs, affecting Arthur too. Jim promptly disables him. They eventually reach the engineering department and begin their search for the malfunction. They locate the issue in the power plant, and when they unlatch the hatch, Aurora is pulled in. An asteroid has led to a rupture in that section of the hull. Jim is also pulled in, yet he manages to cling to the hatch while it continues to close on him. He is eventually drawn in as well, but they act swiftly to seal the rupture. Immediately after resolving the issue, Jim discovers multiple breaches in the ship's hull. Both of them trace the meteor's path and realize it has damaged the reactor control computer. Jim believes he can locate the necessary replacement components. They locate and replace the part, but the reactor venting procedure still malfunctions. They attempt manual venting, but it also fails. Jim deduces that he must open the vent door from the ship's exterior to cool down the reactor. They head to the airlock, and as Jim prepares to exit, he hands Aurora Mancuso's bracelet, unsure if he'll return. She assists him in suiting up, and as he enters the airlock, she urges him to return, unable to live aboard without him. Aurora returns to the reactor room, where the temperature has reached critical levels. A bolt from the reactor strikes Aurora's arm, while Jim nears the vent from the ship's exterior and observes the door. The reactor room's temperature escalates as he attempts to manually override the vent door. He quickly understands that he must keep the door ajar manually for the reactor to vent, and he informs Aurora. She disapproves of his decision, but he goes forward anyway, instructing her to initiate the reactor's venting process. She's against risking his life, and they dispute it, but ultimately he convinces her to vent the reactor for the greater good. The procedure works, but reactor fumes forcefully propel Jim away, severing his safety tether. His suit's pressure is plummeting as well. He informs Aurora of his predicament, and she hastily moves to find another suit and rescue him. Once more, he voices his apologies to her. She dons a suit and ventures outside to retrieve him, but her tether comes up short. In a surprising turn, she clutches onto his severed tether and successfully hauls him back. She drags him into the medical bay, only to discover that he's no longer breathing. Utilizing Mancuso's bracelet, she overrides the infirmary's safety protocols to resuscitate him. The automated medical pod effectively revives Jim. She finds it in her heart to forgive him. Later on, Aurora mends Arthur and they conduct a proper celestial funeral for Mancuso. Jim escorts her to the medical bay, revealing that he has discovered a way to repurpose the medical pod for hibernation. He asks her to enter the pod and complete the remaining journey safely inside it. She ultimately decides to forego the pod and chooses to remain awake alongside him on the vessel. Jim eventually pops the question, and they spend their lives together aboard the ship. Nearly 9 decades later, the Avalon finally lands on Homestead 2. The crew members awaken to discover the ship in an unusual condition. Aurora leaves a recorded narrative, recounting the life she and Jim lived on board while others slept.